more robust conversation.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the latest Behind the Bench webinar presented by the National Soccer Coaches Association of Canada. We will give just a couple more, well, maybe 1 more minute or so to let all of our participants join up. Hopefully you all have been having a great summer and enjoying the great weather and of course the return to play. And that's what we're here to speak about today. So hopefully you can get some good good value from all of the wisdom and experience and everything that we have on our panel today. So as we wait just a little while longer, I'll briefly introduce myself and some of our colleagues here. So my name is Richard Bucciarelli, and I'm the Director of Sports Science with NSCAC, and of course helping out to set up a lot of these different webinars and discussions with the organization. We've got Tony Ferrara, who is the Technical Director of our association here. We've got Kosmas Mouratidis, Director of Coaching. And we've got from the United States, Eskay. Am I saying that right?
Yes, you are.
Got it. Okay. He is the Director of Coaching at FC Fredrick, which is located
in Maryland.
In Maryland. All right. So we've got a unique and diverse group of people, perspectives from north and south of the border. Looks like the room is starting to fill up, so that's great. So welcome everybody, and maybe I'll let Tony start us off with this discussion today, which is how has return to play worked for you?
Thank you, Richard. Thank you very much, and welcome everyone, and welcome Coach Eskay from Maryland. And we'll get a new look at how things are working south of the border, which is always interesting. So the OSA, with this COVID, I guess things have changed quite a bit. How we deal with our daily lives, how we play, how we eat, how we learn, how we study, how we move around, and all those things. And soccer has been affected as well. The OSA has worked very hard, I guess, and diligently in putting together protocols and guidelines for clubs to follow, to assist the clubs in putting together a plan that would allow all of the players to come back and play and train safely. And so I'll start with that. Then I'll start with Kazi, if you don't mind, Kaz.
Not at all.
Since you are the local guy. So the OSA has all of these guidelines and protocols, but each club still had to put together their own, if you will, action plan, taking into account the recommendations and protocols and guidelines of the OSA. So what has your club done to ensure the safety of the players and the coaches and the parents?
Well, first and foremost, thanks for inviting, and Bo, welcome to the chat. The organization follows the guidelines, the protocols that the OSA puts out, and what we do is try and fine-tune them and tweak them and text them so it works within our club, because every club has a differing template, obviously based on their clientele, the area that they're in. And we're in York region, and because of our location, we had some setbacks in terms of time, but then everything has seemed to flatten out, as it were. The questions that we asked ourselves as we were moving forward in the process were, how could we manage comfortably, effectively, the issue of having, one, the virus in an abundant fashion, not necessarily in the sport community, but in our community in general, and two, how could reinstatement of activity, participation, be brought in a phased place? So we follow what Ontario suggests, but then we go to our membership, and our membership has certain and specific concerns that are not different. They're not foreign to what anybody else has, but they might be in a different timeline. And so we found that in our membership, there was a huge demand to try and get back into play, into participation, but to mitigate that with the safety concerns, obviously. And so it seemed like for every 3 people that we contacted, the fourth one didn't want to participate because they felt it was a safety issue. So about 75% of our clientele were anxious to get back into play, and about 25%, although anxious, deferred and said, we're going to wait. And in doing so, what the club did was we allowed our participants to register without having to pay any fees and got them organized in rosters and roles. And then when the time came for them to register and pay fees, the ones that didn't want to, didn't have to, but at least we had them register within the system. We could move forward whatever we needed to do in terms of
right, because those are all, I guess, administrative things.
Yeah.
Talking about, we'll leave that for a second. We'll come back to it.
Okay.
And Coach Bo, how are things working out in the States with with COVID, and we're returning to play? I mean, we have probably different. I would think the guidelines may be the same. The intent is the same to make sure that everybody's safe. But how are things in your part of the world?
Well, I assume I'm on the call because I come from a country that at the national level is not doing a great job. And it's creating lots of complications, to be honest with you. On the one hand, I would be willing to bet if we could share our return to play protocols amongst this webinar, they would look pretty similar. I think the science and the recommendations are pretty well understood at this point. The problem that we are running into is essentially like political jurisdictions. So, you know, we have obviously the national government, we have states, we have counties, we have cities. And because the national guidance, there hasn't been any, it's created situations where each individual subdivision is trying to put out ideas and policies based on their unique geography. And so I'll just give you a couple examples so you have a sense of it. Maryland, where my club is located, is about 45 minutes outside of Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, so two major eastern seaboard states. Our governor in Maryland was very proactive. One of the earliest to get in front of quarantine periods. And as a state, we did a fantastic job of flattening the curve. And specifically in the county where my club is located, we have extremely low positivity rates, hospital numbers, low number of mortalities, all of that stuff. So in our area, we're doing very well. But what happens is it's, you know, you cross the county line. And so our neighboring county, Montgomery County, they have a little bit different political structure. Montgomery County right now is not allowed to use their fields for games, whereas my county is. So most leagues, you know, involve, for example, multi-county or even multi-state experiences. So trying to figure out who can actually play games and when, and that part's been very, very challenging. But before I just want to say I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you guys and share what's going on. It's funny to hear you say south of the border, because to us that means someplace even further south. Yeah. But yeah, so and I'll give you just a little bit more. So my perspective is from someone who runs a club. I also sit on the executive committee of one of the largest regional leagues in the United States. It's called the Club Champions League. It's most of the big clubs in Virginia and in Maryland. And then I also speak in a sense as a parent. I have, well, 5 kids on my journey, but 2 that are still playing. They're now at the collegiate level. And so we are having to navigate what that looks like for them in terms of their collegiate soccer experience and going back to college and all that kind of stuff. So I have a few different perspectives I might share today.
Well, excellent. Yeah, and then we're looking forward to hearing you talk about that. Because I'll come back to you. Actually, I'll go back to Richard this time. Richard, you had an opportunity to go from club to club, I guess, with your coaching seminars and with your fitness programs that you run for clubs and so on. How have you, what are some of the things you have seen that are working very well and that clubs are doing well, and some of the things that maybe are not working as well?
So yeah, thanks, Tony. it's interesting because, you know, the first phase of return to play here, and I think probably in the United States as well, involved smaller groups and, you know, physical work like running and those types of exercises where players were not, you know, don't necessarily need to be too close together so they could maintain social distance. So I was actually, you know, probably, I mean, I believe I would say I was able to start working, you know, a lot earlier than maybe a lot of coaches on the field with teams. So what worked well, you know, it's not that hard if you have a big enough field and enough space to do any type of fitness work or conditioning work. I love to do that kind of stuff with the ball and with, you know, with small-sided games and things like that, as opposed to just running. So I wasn't able to do that as much, but the, you know, the other type of individual conditioning work I thought went really well. The other challenge I've had, though, is because in addition to, you know, the work that I do with clubs on the field, because that actually I thought had gone well, my facility, which is located inside an indoor soccer facility where the space is a little bit more limited, that was closed for 5 months and only recently reopened. And so I can say that, you know, from the perspective of a small business owner, it was pretty challenging. You know, we more or less had to get in touch with a lot of our customers and let them know we could do some individual conditioning work on fields that were available. We could not take them into our location, and we've only just been able to do that now. That being said, I do think the players who took advantage of this time to stay in shape on their own, and I would go all the way back to March and April, and, you know, maybe you may have had some players that just laid on the couch all day and played video games and all of that. But the others that maybe had a little bit more, you know, more discipline and self-direction, that took advantage of that time to stay in shape, you can really see, I'm almost seeing two different groups. One that are, it's like they never missed a beat. They're fit, they've healed from all their injuries, and they're doing really well. And the others are very out of shape. So
very out of shape. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like you said, they've been sitting at home doing nothing practically all this time. So it's very difficult. Coach Kos, so, I mean, every club has a plan. I'm sure you have a beautiful plan working for your club. We'll just go through some of the things that, you know, players and coaches need to do before they can come on the field, right? So all the players need to sign a form, right? That basically releasing the club from all, you know, responsibilities, and that they are aware of the risks that they are putting themselves into, right? So there is a form that everybody has to fill in and bring it to the club, right? And then there is also a way of tracking all of the players that are participating in case of someone perhaps coming down with COVID. So how is your club handling that?
Well, the critical element is communication and coordination amongst the executive or the administrative, and then moving forward with all the coaches and the parents and the soccer community that is what we are. So the online form is submitted, and families read through, sign off on their status, and then on a regular basis, because we know we're training within a said cohort on said field, that we have a tracking system of the players come in, their forms have been submitted online, and then when they come in, we ask them again if they have any issues in terms of the same issues that have been indicated on the form, where something might show up between the morning and the evening when we begin our training. The players get their temperature checks, the players get their hands spritzed with the hand sanitizer, they go to their distanced areas, and off they go to the training session. Dependent on what phase we are in, it would be in 1 block or 2 blocks or 3 blocks of a specific field area, following which players would come back after the training session. We'd have the temperature check again, hands spritzed, and the next day we'd begin the whole process again. Our tracking is simply organizing who trains in what cohort, because that cohort allows us to know from a tracing perspective. Let's say player C is someone who has experienced some of these issues that are similar to what a COVID infected person would look like. We would then have that person isolate. We would go through the appropriate tests and checking with that individual, and off they go. We had an instance with one of our volunteer coaches where she was not feeling particularly well. She went, got herself tested. She was away for 4 days. When the test came back negative, she came back the following week, and we notified everybody within that cohort that that individual had done so, and so everybody was aware of it. And so that there's an openness. There's not an opaque picture you're looking at. It's a very, very clear picture of what goes on and how it goes on. And it's certainly changing and evolving as we move into the next phase of things.
Right. That's great. I mean, it looks like you're doing all the right things, my friend. Coach Eskay, how are things down there in the U.S.? I mean, do they still have to follow pretty well the same protocols that we do? There is a form that the players need to sign, that the coaches need to sign and go from there, or are things a little bit different?
Yeah, no, it all sort of participation in the club experience definitely starts with a COVID waiver. And then, I mean, it's very similar. Like I said, I think these procedures are pretty well hammered out. One thing that we spend some time doing is on educating both our parents and our coaching staff in some ways about complacency problem, because in our area, we have been approved to have full games, right? And the obvious things, no high fives after the game, no bringing the team into 1, 2, 3, that sort of stuff. But what can happen is as things start to appear as though they're kind of normal, all of a sudden when you sub a kid out, they're closer than they should be because they want to talk to their teammates about how they played, or they forget to wear their mask. We ask to training and leaving training and that sort of thing. And so it's like you have to continue to remind people that the reason why we can actually enjoy the field and the game is because we did the right things for a long period of time in quarantine, but we can't let up on that lest it come back and all of a sudden we lose our field permits and can't do anything. So I would just add kind of a continual reminder piece about all of the safety protocols that we all know and to keep on top of them.
Right. And I would imagine, everybody, we're always going to have problems. I mean, we have all the guidelines, all the protocols in place, but there's always someone who's going to try to maybe go around the rules a little bit. I was talking to one of the coaches this morning. So he was telling me that some of his players, they don't just train with their own team, but they also play with their friends out on the streets, with their neighbors and with their friends, and they play with everybody. They play basketball outside, and on the streets, and they play for hockey and so on, and then they get together and come play on the team. So most of or some of these players also have interaction with other kids who are not part of this team, right? But they play with them, and then they come back into the team settings, and all of a sudden, instead of just working with 10, now they're working with 15, 20 people, right? And so it makes it a little bit more difficult to try to control everybody. And you would hope that they would stay within a group and work within a group. But we know that kids are going to be all over the place, right? And we also know that some of the parents may not agree with all the guidelines and all the protocols and all the procedures that the clubs have put in place. And so maybe we can talk about that a little bit, Richard. Have you had any conversation with parents who say, yeah, this is all,
yeah,
it doesn't affect me. Like
I would say, okay. Yeah, I mean, maybe again, because of the fact that in my business, I'm working with people from kind of all over, lots of different clubs and academies. And there are some that, it's like they wanted not just the parent, but even the child to have a mask on the entire time when they were training, which is difficult because there's a little too much carbon dioxide coming in at that point. And, so that would be one side of maybe the spectrum. And then there's been others that, I don't know, think the whole thing is overblown and don't seem to care much. Don't even, like, maybe almost like Bo said, that I've encountered parents and players that are almost, either they've forgotten or they're just treating it like it isn't really a big deal, and they don't watch, they're touching their face maybe, or they're, you know, they're not washing their hands and keeping everything sanitized, and a lot in the middle as well. So there's sort of like, there was definitely a real mixed reaction.
Right.
You know, you don't want to catch yourself, you know, falling into that crowd that doesn't take it seriously, because it is a serious issue, and there are risks. I do maybe wonder though, at some point, you know, if we expect to go a little bit more back to normal, do we need to accept a little bit of risk? You know, I don't know. That's something that I've thought of, but you know, I'm always going more on the side of caution. So.
Right. But when you're dealing with, you know, you have a set of guidelines and a set of protocols that have been established by the club,
Yeah.
well, you want to make sure that they're followed and they're being, you know, followed up to the letter. Otherwise, everybody will end up doing their own thing.
Yeah.
But, Coach Kos, how do you deal with parents who are sure that, you know, this is not going to affect me. I'm okay. My kid is fine. He doesn't need to wear a mask. He doesn't need to wash his hands. Maybe I'm stretching it a little bit, but how do you deal with those type of parents? What do you do?
It's direct. There has to be an open conversation about what the law suggests and what best practices are in that period, because best practices consistently change. The stuff, and I'll use the term stuff, what we knew about COVID, the coronavirus, 5 months ago is substantially different than what we know now. So best practices are going to change accordingly with regards to mask wearing, washing hands, and so on and so forth. So with the parents directly, we've had several conversations, and none get animated or heated, but there's always a question of why. And our answer as a club, and my answer as the TD for the club, is always that my first concern is the health and safety of the players, because if they're healthy and safety now, I hope to have them back next year to be healthy and safety. If they're not safe now, and there's a risk that is associated that is undue with how they're going to participate, we don't want them on the pitch. We don't want them in training. We don't want them anywhere. And those go hand in hand with what the region suggests, what the city suggests, and what the federal and provincial governments suggest. And most parents get it. They say, you know, I see what you've got to say. I don't necessarily agree with you. And so we ask them to respect not just what their child is doing, but the other parents who may have a differing opinion. And on occasion, I've brought in other parents who are level-headed, and they have a conversation about why it's important to them, and vice versa. And it seems to settle down, and they sit in their cars watching the training session 6 feet away, and they joke about it sometimes. And it becomes an issue where it's not inflammatory, and it's not aggressive. It's, I get it, I understand, I don't agree with you, and we'll leave it at that. And that's how it's usually handled.
What about coaches, Coach Eskay? Now, some clubs here, from talking to some of the coaches and some of the technical directors, coaches are required to wear a mask. Some of them have to wear gloves while they're on the field. Nobody else can touch the cones except the coach, right? He's the one, or she's the one, that arranges the cones on the field, and nobody else can touch them, and so on. So what about the coach himself or herself? What are the protocols that guide, you know, the coaches during the training sessions? Sure.
I assume the ones that are wearing gloves, those are the ones that have been identified with poor hygiene out of the gate. I'm teasing, but so in just to kind of paint the whole picture, the way we don't own our own soccer complex or fields or anything like that. So we have to apply for permits to either the city or the county or the school system. And in order to get a permit, we have to provide a full COVID plan that includes maybe some things you wouldn't think about, how to come in and how to leave a facility to kind of minimize traffic and crowding and that sort of thing. It also includes requirements about mask wearing and that sort of thing. So our coaches do have to wear masks during training and games. Now, down here, well, I don't know what the temperature's like up in Canada. Here it's been warm, so it can be uncomfortable after a while. And the solution is simply to back away, you know, even more than 6 feet, 10 feet, you know, take your mask off and catch your breath or whatever. And then if you're engaging with the kids, to make sure the mask is on. Some other things are, when they come up to set their training sessions up, the first thing they do is drop cones 6 to 8 feet apart so that the kids know where to set their equipment down and where to return to get their drinks and stuff when they're having breaks. Things that you wouldn't think about, like pennies, right? Doing scrimmages and stuff. So, and we're still thinking through this a little bit. One model has, we have the kids with different training tops that they, in theory, purchase as part of the club experience, but they don't always remember to bring them. But to be better about having multiple colors in their bag so that we can, do games and that sort of thing. Or if we're relying on the coach's own pennies, they can be distributed, but they can't change during the training session, right? So if you had some greens and you wanted the green over to orange, it either has to be a brand new orange penny. There's no kids kind of swapping their pennies, and just kind of little things like that. And then sanitizing. Well, so a lot of our coaches, bring the balls to training, but that can create some issues. So we're asking families to make sure that they're bringing the balls, and the balls that the coaches have are more for, loaner, and then the sanitization and those pieces. But I would say that's, kind of the universe of how they're handling the in the moment coaching and stuff.
Yeah, and I would imagine also that coaching or dealing with different age groups has different sets of problems or issues or potential problems. Coach Kos, what's your experience with that? Coaching with, working with the 8, 9, 10-year-olds and working with the 15, 16, 17-year-olds. What are the differences in the way you approach it?
The same protocols, Tony, go into play. Nothing changes. It's the interpretation of how a younger player will look at something, and that interpretation is almost always, is what the parent will let them know. And then when they get to the field for the first time, it's by example. So what we ended up trying to do on a couple of occasions is have some older players come in as mentors, if you will, and have them go through the process. And we have field marshals that help them through it as well. So they would come in, and we're working with, let's say, 2010s, 2011s, 2012s, that age cohort. In the first couple of sessions, first couple of weeks, it was a challenge because they were throwing stuff all over the place. And it was, we're glad to be back at the field. There's an excitement of being back, and the but is we have to make sure that you're safe. So the field marshals helped them with it. Some of the older players helped them with it, and they went through the process, and that became a norm, something that was regular as part of their habitual routine. With the older players that were responsible, there was no issue because it was explained once or twice, and then it became a habit. For some of the ones that have some challenges in terms of listening, which we have all experienced, those individuals had to be constantly reminded. And at one point, we simply said, if you're not prepared in this fashion, you can't train in this fashion. And it was a harsh message to a couple of kids, 2 kids particularly, and they had to sit out the training session and just sit back and watch. The next time they were in, not a problem, not an issue. So the understanding of is just a longer process for the younger players, and the administration of takes a little bit longer with the younger players. Now being into this process about 9-10 weeks, we now know what the hiccups were in the first 9-10 weeks. We've tried to address them. There's always going to be something new, and we work on those. And working on them simply means knowing that our field marshals are communicated with on a regular basis. We coordinate collectively at the field, and then we coordinate what we're going to do. So there's someone who sprays, someone who does whatever they're going to do. And then in the training, this isn't just the field marshals now, it's the coach's responsibility. So the coaches are on the same page as well about, as Bo suggested, field setup and what you have to do and who's bringing the balls and where the cones go. And all that stuff put into play begins to look like there's a semblance of what a regular practice or a training session looked like 5 months ago. And the only issue that we ever faced was that someone's going to try and get there too early or do something that was a bit out of character from what our norm is now. And otherwise it works pretty well.
Yeah, well, that's good. I mean, like the OSA was saying in their protocols and guidelines, that each club needs to work out their own problems, their own issues, and their own guidelines as well. And I'm not sure how many clubs are doing that. I want to give you an experience that I had the other day. I'm watching a soccer game. I'm out there watching a soccer game. And on one bench, there's one coach and 5 or 6 players. On the other bench, there's 4 coaches and 5 or 6 players. And none of the 4 coaches was wearing a mask. The coach on the other side was not wearing a mask either. But none of the 4 coaches were wearing a mask on the bench. And they were talking to each other, interacting with each other like everything was okay. And I'm watching, and I almost wanted to go over and say, put a mask on, you know, do it right. But they were not. And at halftime, they were all in a small huddle and talking about the game and talking about, I guess, what you do at halftime. So, you know, as much as the clubs and the OSA and everybody else comes up with these protocols and with all of these guidelines, you know, the coaches still have to carry them out, and the players still have to follow them. And if they don't, then there is a problem. So I want to ask another question now about return to play phase 3, right? Where, you know, some clubs are actually playing games, and I'm not sure how that's working out, if it's working out well or not, if there are some issues or if there are some problem, or if there are some precautions that need to be taken when you're playing the full game, the 11v11 game. And I wanted to ask you, Richard, have you had any experience with that? And what's, you know, what's your take on that?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, in the end, it's always easier to control things if you're just in your own group. Oh, I know Kos has to go, so I see him.
Has to go, yeah.
Goodbye.
Take care,
All right.
Kos. Thank you very much.
Stay well. Bo, hope to see you again.
It's nice to meet you. Same to you.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye. Yeah, so I was saying that, you know, of course it's easier to control things, you know, when you're working with your own small group in training, and the number of interactions that players are going to have, you know, with each other all of a sudden goes up when you're playing in games. And of course, there are lots of other things that are a little bit outside of your control, and, you know, contact with each other and teammates and opponents and so on. So, I mean, I think that, you know, overall, you know, in Ontario for sure, you know, that our governing body did a good job of putting, you know, the right rules and the right protocols in place. It's a little bit more risky, like I said, because the interactions are, you know, that there's more interactions. But you know, more or less you accept the slight higher risk, like I said, and other than that, you kind of just keep going with it. Something I'll speak maybe just on the physical side of things with return to play, that you know, I was part of the group in Ontario Soccer that put the recommendations together for the physical side of training with return to train, and then of course eventually return to play. And part of that was about trying to control and minimize a little bit the volume, and more or less we mean the amount of time that players are training and the amount of time that players are playing in games, because they've been off for a long time. And even if they had been running and maintaining their fitness, that's different than regular training and playing with your team. So I think a good sign, I would say to all coaches that are watching, and, you know, when we put this online later, something to keep in mind, whether it's in training or in games, if you've done a good job managing the volume of training, the amount of time, meaning you've kind of started a little bit lower and not just throwing someone into 90 minutes or long sessions, the sign that you've done that well is that you don't have a lot of injuries right now. Right. Because we've been into it for about a month already. So, you know, of course, player health in terms of preventing the virus is the most important thing. But the next aspect to player health is not overloading them after having all the time off. So if you don't have a lot of injuries right now, then you've done something well with volume and training load. So that's a good sign. Right.
You've done a good job. Coach Bo, so are you playing intra-club games right now, or are you playing a full league, or are you playing against other clubs outside of your area?
So in our county in Maryland, in late June, the county authorities who control the fields and work with the health department, they allowed us to get back out on the fields. Initially, the sort of standard, everybody, you know, individualized work, very far apart, one kid, one ball, you know, that sort of model. Then over the course of the summer, as the positivity rates and hospitalizations and whatever remained low, they increased the opportunities for us to do things. So we actually this summer during the month of July ran a 7v7 league. So we couldn't go to 11v11, but we were able to run a 7 versus 7 league. And it was, I mean, you want to talk about pent up demand. We ran out of space. We had over 700 kids participating, not at once, not on the same field, but in terms of the nature of the league, because, and I can't tell you how many families just came up and thanked us for helping get something normalized, at least a little bit in these kids' lives. So now where we're at is, again, our numbers still remain, and that was, and just again, sort of little pieces of data, that was largely kids from inside the county. It wasn't a lot of kids from outside areas or maybe hot spots or that sort of thing. So it was pretty insulated environment. We're now allowed to play 11v11, and what's on the horizon is our league play, which again is a multi-state league. Now, Maryland and Virginia historically have very similar, have a lot of similarities in terms of, you know, I don't know, culturally and work-related and lots of things. So our league is basically a Maryland-Virginia league, but so this weekend, we're going to have intra-club friendlies that are 11v11 that will be the first 11v11 soccer games that we have played. And then the following week, we actually will have our first 11v11 games against a club from Loudoun County in Virginia. And the one thing that I'll say, and I actually, this is being discussed more and more in our coaching circles down here is, you know, the best approaches are data-driven. Well, our clubs, our soccer community can be a source of data that can help us understand what's going on. So specifically this summer, we did our league. We had 4 weeks of camps. We had training sessions for our travel teams. We are not aware of a single transmission situation that came through contact with any of our activities. We did have one case where somebody had the virus and showed up to something, and we, you know, communicated and all that kind of stuff, but it wasn't from interacting with our groups. It came from, you know, they were down at the beach or making bad decisions or whatever. Yeah. But so now what's happening is I just saw something from the San Diego community where a bunch of clubs down there, close to 40,000 kids, were talking about what they've seen in terms of virus transmission. And the numbers are incredibly low, almost statistically insignificant, right? So I think that's part of the dialogue here is what are we finding as we start to, you know, as Richard says, increase the risk profile a little bit. And one thing that I'll go back to, and then I feel like I've just grabbed the mic, is one of the interesting CDC guidelines is how they define exposure, okay? Center for Disease Control in the US. And the exposure under their own rules is closer than 6 feet for more than 15 minutes, okay? So if you think about the way a normal soccer game works, you know, unless you're defending corner kicks for 30 minutes or something, you should find another team to coach. But you know, the kids are in and out of each other's space very, you know, instantaneously almost, or maybe a center back marking a striker or something like that, you know. But generally, it's very fluid, and you're just not. And so the question is, as we continue to do more things, are our numbers, transition numbers, essentially non-existent, so that we can say soccer's pretty safe, you know, and don't be so worried about that. Be worried about other things, but maybe not playing soccer with your kids.
But you brought up the question of distance. We have a question from Robert, from BC. Richard, I'm not able to see the question. Would you? You mind?
All right. So I'll read it here. Yeah. Okay. He said that in BC, we're expected to keep players 6 feet apart for return to play. And how does this work from your perspective? He says we're also talking about cohorts. So this kind of touches on maybe what Bo was mentioning about 6 feet apart. And so that's interesting that I had not heard that. So essentially, like, if I'm getting this correct, then exposure constitutes being, let's say, closer than 6 feet for a certain amount of time. And so really it's the time frame that's the most important.
Length, I guess. Yeah.
Length of time. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's, I guess one of these, it's, I guess as you kind of think through it, it's why in the States, the problem we're having is young people like going to parties and stuff. And so you can understand they're going to be close together. They're going to be right in each other's face for 10, 15, 20 minutes hanging out. And that just increases the chances. Now, it could very well be that the CDC guidelines change and shift as we get more data. But right now, the data that we are seeing seems to suggest that, I mean, we haven't had any transmission, right? We don't have anyone in the club that has it, right? So unless, we're just this strangely immune community, it could be that the activity is not conducive to spreading, but we may learn something different. But right now, that data, I think, could be really helpful.
And again, like we were saying before, go ahead, Richard.
Oh yeah, no, I said it. It's a good point that it's good evidence, and maybe the longer all of us go without positive cases, the stronger the argument is that maybe soccer is safer than we think. I mean, just specifically to Robert's point there, of course you can't play soccer 6 feet apart all the time, so. I think, in training and everything, we started real social distancing. We have to try to progress. And I suppose it would be great to continue to get even more evidence, that we can last longer without exposure. And if that's the case, then we can keep going and maybe go back to normal sooner than we thought. So.
Yeah, and we hope so. I have a couple of other issues that I want to address with you guys, but just to make a point on that, on the safety and everything else. You can have all the protocols, all the guidelines in place, but each individual, the coach, the player, the parents, they need to take responsibility for what they do. For example, what do you do after the game, after the training? Do you go home and talking about a player, and you go straight to your computer or your machine and start playing, or do you take a shower? You throw your clothes in the washer. Do you you clean your shoes? Do you take care of your equipment? Because when you go back the next day or 2 days later, right, if you don't take care of yourself, then you're going to bring all of that back. So all the protocols, all the guidelines are great, but I think everybody, players, coaches, and everybody else needs to take responsibility every day for what they do, so they don't bring back something that's not very good, right? So my other question is about the legal issues. I was talking with some of the coaches this week in preparation for this, and some of them were saying, what happens if God forbid, one of the kids gets infected, and I'm the coach of that team? What am I responsible for? What could I be? I know Bo has got a lot of experience in this, with your legal background, Bo. So what is the liability of the coach and the club in a situation like that, or if there is any?
Well, and I don't want to necessarily speak authoritatively, but I do have, I was a practicing attorney for a period of my life, and the status now, they call me a recovering attorney because I do soccer for a living. But a lot of the work should be done by the waiver process. And I would advise clubs to be, look, it's about kids playing, and a kid shows up and he wants to join in, and no, in another world that we used to live in, of course, come in, join, have fun, we'll bring you in. But you have to be really, number one, you have to make sure that the way your waiver is constructed, somebody looks at it, not just sort of say, hey, let's put these things in. And there's a lot of them out there. So I think the waiver process is key. Right now, in the circles the big clubs that I talk to, nobody is losing a lot of sleep over, a potential lawsuit, because one of the ways, the way a lawsuit like that, a tort lawsuit would work in the U.S., it gets down to a question about duty. And the duty question is, are you doing something that's very different than the norm, right? So if everybody is following protocols and is doing these all things, and you're the guy that you're not following any of the protocols, then you could expose yourself to some liability, right? So, but if you're doing what the norm is in terms of, this is what the CDC says, this is what the Canadian health authorities say, there's some insulation there that also backs up your waiver, your waivers that you would have had folks sign. So
right. Yeah, and that makes sense. I mean, you still you follow the protocols, you follow the guidelines. Everybody follows the protocols and guidelines. Things should be okay, should be better. We're almost, so now summer will be over soon. Couple of months if we're lucky, and then we're going indoors. And that's going to present another set of challenges and another set of maybe guidelines, a new set of guidelines, a new set of protocols when you go indoor, because, you know, the studies are saying that indoors it could be a little bit more dangerous, I guess, than being outdoors. So how do you see that, Richard? I mean, most of your work in the winter, well, all your work in the winter is done indoors, right? So how are you preparing for that? And do you think there should be, or there will be, new indoor guidelines and protocols?
Yeah, so I'll speak about, let's say, the work that I do on indoor fields, and then I can talk a little bit about my facility, which is maybe more challenging. So on the field, based on what we got from, you know, from Ontario Soccer and the Canadian government, was in an indoor facility, it depends on the space and the ventilation. And so there are some, you know, which are quite big, and that being the case, some indoor facilities here in Ontario, including one of the ones that, you know, I did quite a bit of work in June and July, are treated, or they were treated similar to the guidelines for public gatherings. So you could have, you know, a coach with 10 players, as long as, you know, you maintain social distance and all that, if the space was big enough. If not, then, you know, initially, again, a lot of these places had to close down, including the one where you know, my training center was. And, you know, I would knock on wood and say, hopefully we can keep, you know, flattening the curve and all that. And maybe indoor facilities won't be forced to close down. And you know, even if they can't go, you know, back to normal and have 11v11 games and lots of people, maybe training and some form of competition with lower numbers will still be permitted. My space, which is a fitness center, a training center, and again, it's really tough. Like a lot of the work we do, you know, the coaches and the fitness trainers are in very close contact with the athletes all the time. And again, that's why we had to close. But now with reopening, yeah, we have lots of different protocols in place. We have to have masks on all the time. We're sanitizing equipment. We use treadmills and other types of equipment, which we're having to sanitize after every use. You know, in terms of how many people, there's limits to how many people can enter and be in the space at a certain time. So we follow those protocols and guidelines as, you know, to the T, to the letter of the law. And you know, we just, I think, you know, Bo mentioned, and I know Tony, you mentioned before, just that it's really, it's up to the individual to just be really diligent with it, not to, I guess, become complacent. And kind of, you know, and forget, you know, I know Bo mentioned earlier, but, you know, it's kind of easy to forget maybe that, oh yeah, you know, we have to wipe everything down. We have to watch, you know, where we're putting our hands. Don't make contact. Like it's almost a natural thing that you think of going to shake someone's hand all the time, or, or give them a high five when they do something well and all that. And you have to, you know, you have to always remind yourself not to do that. It's definitely challenging, but as I said, we are, you know, we've reopened now, and we're following protocols. And, you know, maybe again, just like with the work on the field, if we can have a few months or more with no positive cases on record, then that's more good evidence to support that we're doing a good job. So.
Coach Eskay, so are you preparing for indoors? And if so, how are you doing that?
We typically have a pretty robust indoor cycle that starts for us maybe in December, but definitely January and February. It is on my radar screen, but I'm honestly nervous about it, because Right now, so we get facilities. We don't own our facility. We get facilities again from the county and the city, and they are letting their indoor spaces be used, but everybody has to wear a mask, meaning even the people participating. And, you know, that issue of kids, you know, moving around and having to breathe through a mask doesn't sit right with me. So I'm hopeful in part that maybe things will continue to improve and that particular restriction won't be in place once indoor season is coming. The other thing that I'm hopeful for, so these aren't really planning ideas, they're, you know, I burn incense and say a couple chants that hopefully they'll come our way, but that we have a mild winter and that we'll go and we'll train on turf outdoor if we can.
As long as possible, yeah.
Yeah, so that's
Richard,
about as far as we are right now.
Scientist, is it possible to train indoors wearing a mask?
Well, yeah, like I mentioned carbon dioxide before, right? So, I mean, essentially you need oxygen all the time. And of course, you know, having a mask on, when you're exhaling carbon dioxide, you're trapping some of that there. So then the next time you inhale, you're taking in slightly less oxygen than you normally could. And, you know, if you get too much carbon dioxide in your blood, then it's really bad. So, the challenge, of course, with exercise is that the oxygen demand goes way up, and soccer is a very intense sport. So there's moments where you have, you know, oxygen demand almost as high as it can possibly be. So I see some of these masks that are made for training, you know, and so they've got a little bit more, like the fabric is a little more breathable. There's some actual holes in it, you know. I wonder then about, you know, if the mask is more breathable, then is it really protecting you from the virus or not? More or less, I mean, I might have to talk to a physician and maybe they change my mind, but I don't think it's possible to play an intense soccer training or game with a mask on. I don't see it, not over long periods of time. I think the fatigue would be too, and the risk of problems with carbon dioxide might be a little too high. So
yeah, for sure,
I wouldn't do it.
sure.
Yeah.
And that's why it may be a good idea, just a thought for clubs and coaches and everybody to start planning. What is the indoor season going to look like? Is it going to be, are we going to start from the beginning again where we have a phase 1 indoor? We had a phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 outdoor. So now we do a phase 1 indoor and then see how things go and then move into a phase 2 indoor and so on and on. Or is that some other way that we could do this? But I think it would be wise to start planning now. And I'm sure, you know, the organizations are thinking about that. But it would be a good idea to start planning now and see how things can be done, and start planning and start, you know, going on the drawing board and figuring out how many players, how many facilities you have available, and so on. And you mentioned ventilation before, Richard, which is a very, you know, very huge component. A lot of the indoor facilities may be okay, but you know, if you're in a gymnasium, in a school gymnasium, I mean, there's really basically no ventilation in there at all. So, yeah. So there needs to be some good planning. You know, when we're going to move indoor, because we all want to go back indoors, right? We all want to continue to play. So I'm going to leave you with, we only have another 4 minutes left by my watch here. So, Richard, I'll start with you and then let Bo close it. Bo, if you don't mind. So what are your last words to the coaches and the players out there in terms of, you know, following protocols, following the guidelines, you know, safety, taking ownership, you know, of your own health, and so it doesn't affect everybody else? What are your last words on that?
Yeah, so I mean, safety and player health should always have been the first priority, and of course always is going to be now. We have this extra added concern of the virus that maybe we didn't, you know, we didn't have those concerns before. But I actually think, you know, there is one, you know, maybe positive that's come out of it, is that things like personal hygiene, making sure that you wash your hands before you touch your face and touch water bottles and all those kinds of things that we really took for granted before, and maybe not a lot of us coaches or players had good habits there. Now we've been forced to. So I really believe that once we get through this virus, I believe that we get back to normal, maybe we're going to be so much more careful and so much more diligent that things like the flu and things like, the types of infections you might get from an open cut, or, those kind of things that were a big health risk before, maybe we'll start to eliminate those kind of things now. And I'm hoping that's maybe a silver lining from all of this. Yeah, I don't know. That's I'm trying to stay positive. So.
Yeah, Coach Bo, your last word.
I kind of remind the kids to not forget about the quarantine period and what it was like. And we don't want to go back to that, right? So do the right things, play your part in keeping it safe by following these guidelines, even if you think they might be silly or over the top or whatever, because we don't want to go back to not playing, not seeing our friends, trapped in our homes, that whole thing again. So, and the only way we can keep from going back is if we all work together and exercise some personal responsibility until the vaccine or it's all clear or whatever. So,
yeah, talking with one of the coaches the other day, I don't know if he was joking or if he was serious. He says, Tony, remember all the coaches, all the players used to have a kit in their bag where they had a water bottle, they had an extra pair of shoes, all of those things, right? An extra pair of socks. So now they need to pack maybe some, I don't want to, market, promote Lysol, but, a bottle of Lysol spray and some wipes and so on and on and on, all of those things, right? Maybe it should become part of their kit. Why not? So that as soon as you finish the game or the practice or whatever, you're able to clean yourself quickly. And but anyway, that's Richard. I think we're almost done. Are we 2:59 or we're almost there?
Looks like it. Yeah. All right. So
we're pretty good. So listen, thank you both, Coach Bo. Thank you very much.
Very welcome.
Taking the time
Thank you guys.
from so far away, just south of the border, to talk to us and share your experiences and what's going on down there. And hopefully we could do this again. I would like to do another one, Richard, maybe in about a month or so, 4 weeks now, and say, this is our phase 1 on webinar. We're going to do a phase 2 on webinar. And maybe by then, there'll be some guidelines and some more ideas about going indoor and what we could do indoors, and so on. So perhaps we can talk about those things. But again, Richard, thank you very much for setting this up, for your participation and your contribution. Coach Bo, thank you very much again, and looking forward to doing it again, maybe soon. And everyone else out there who's listening and watching, thank you for tuning in. And hopefully you picked up some stuff that will help you. And if it didn't, and you have some more questions or anything like that, you can always write to us at NSCAC, and we'll try to find the right answer for you. Thank you very much.
You're
Thanks,
welcome.
guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye, Richard.